There is a peculiar unease that most people cannot name but feel every time they are left alone in a quiet room. It creeps in with the silence, with the absence of the reassuring noise of another person's voice, and it whispers questions you did not invite. Who am I without them? What am I when no one is looking? These are not merely casual reflections. They are the tremors at the edge of the abyss of the self. And so, we rush to fill the space with lovers, with partners, with friendships and rituals of connection, believing that the absence of another is the true threat. But I tell you now, it is not the absence of another that terrifies you. It is the presence of yourself, unmediated, unsoftened, unresquet. Most do not want to face that mirror, because it strips away the masks and dismantles the carefully curated narrative of who you are. Alone, there is no applause. Alone, there is no reflection of your chosen identity in someone else's approving eyes. Alone, you must meet what lies beneath the facade, and that is what most call loneliness. But loneliness, in its purest form, is not absence, it is confrontation. From early childhood, a script is placed into your hands. You are told to grow, to learn, to seek, and above all, to find someone to love, to build with, to complete you. You are told that without this union, you are incomplete, defective, unfinished, and so you chase another as though they were the missing limb of your soul. Society does not merely endorse this script, it sanctifies it. The solitary are portrayed as tragic figures, unfulfilled, objects of pity or suspicion. What is rarely examined is the price paid for obeying this script. For every union formed in the name of completeness, there is often a silent burial of the self-dreams deferred, désirs silenced, the sharp edges of individuality worn down until they are smooth enough to fit inside the confines of a partnership. It is not that love itself is false, it is that the form of love most celebrate is built on avoidance, avoidance of the void, avoidance of solitude, avoidance of the frightening work of individuation. I have seen it time and again. Two people come together and immediately begin to negotiate away their rawness. A man stops writing the kind of words that once kept him awake at night because they make his partner uneasy. A woman stops painting the landscapes that stir too much longing because her partner prefers cheerful colors. These are not acts of cruelty, but of adaptation, small, invisible sacrifices made in the name of harmony. But harmony, when bought at the price of truth, is only a slow poison. You call it maturity, you call it compromise. But in truth, it is the art of vanishing by degrees. And one day you wake up and realize that the person you have become exists not because you chose them, but because the relationship required them. There's a deeper tragedy here. Most people do not know they are doing this. They believe that the love they feel is saving them from isolation, when in reality it is shielding them from the only encounter that matters, the encounter with themselves. They cling to one another not out of abundance but out of terror, projecting onto the other all that they refuse to hold within themselves, their tenderness, their intuition, their capacity for depth. And when you give away those inner treasures, you do not double them, you amputate them. You create an identity that is half yours, half borrowed. And then you wonder why life feels strangely hollow, even in the midst of affection. True love, if such a thing is to be spoken of, does not require your disappearance. It does not ask you to dim your light so another feels more comfortable in their shadow. It does not demand that you put aside your calling, your restlessness, your visions, but most love in this world is not of that kind. It is fusion, disguised as intimacy, dependence, disguised as devotion, and fusion, while intoxicating in its early stages, is death to the soul's evolution. For the soul was not designed for fusion. It was designed for wholeness. And wholeness is an internal task, not a mutual contract. You have been taught that solitude is a deficiency, but I say to you, it is the crucible of transformation. Solitude is not the bitter exile of the unloved. It is the chosen terrain of those who refuse to betray themselves. In solitude, there is no one to perform for, no one to soften the truth, no one to reassure you that the person you pretend to be is enough. And that is precisely why so few remain there. It is easier to retreat into the noise, into the distractions of shared routines, than to sit alone and listen to the unfiltered voice of your own soul. But if you wish to know who you are beyond the inherited script, you must enter that silence willingly. Do not mistake me, I do not preach against relationships, nor do I elevate isolation as a moral ideal. I speak of a far more subtle distinction, the difference between choosing union as an expression of wholeness and entering union to escape the work of becoming whole. The former is rare, luminous, unthreatened by the individuality of the other. The latter is the norm, and it binds two people in a quiet pact of avoidance. Both feel like love, but only one will lead you deeper into yourself. The other will keep you circling the same small pool, calling it an ocean. To choose solitude is to refuse the counterfeit. It is to walk through the desert of yourself without a map, without the promise of rescue, trusting that on the other side lies not salvation, but self-recognition. The world will not applaud you for this. It will call you selfish, strange, unlovable. It will say you are wasting your life, but the life they want for you is not yours, it is theirs, replicated and polished for the comfort of the collective. To break from that is to accept exile, and exile is the price of freedom. When I speak of freedom, I do not mean the shallow freedom to choose between options that society has already approved for you. I mean the feral, ungoverned freedom of one who no longer needs the world's permission to think, to feel, to exist. This kind of freedom demands that you give up the soft pleasures of belonging, that you stop smoothing the edges of your truth so it can be digested without discomfort. It asks you to accept that you may walk alone for a very long time, and yet, in that walking, you begin to feel something you have never felt before. The unmediated weight of your own existence, terrifying in its vastness, exhilarating in its authenticity. Solitude, as I understand it, is not isolation for its own sake. It is not withdrawal out of bitterness or injury. It is the sacred space in which the fragments of the self are called home. It is where the chaos of the unconscious is given room to speak, where the archetypes that govern your life rise to the surface to be seen, understood, and integrated, and these archetypes will not reveal themselves while you are busy maintaining the comfort of another. They appear in the long, quiet hours when your defenses are down, when you can no longer distract yourself with the rhythm of another's presence. They are your guides, your tormentors, your teachers, and they require your full attention. You will not find them in the warmth of consensus. You will find them in the cold, in the unfamiliar, in the moments when you are certain you have made a mistake by walking away from the herd. That is when the real work begins. You will meet the shadow, the parts of you you have disowned, the instincts you have shamed into silence. You will meet the anima or animus, the inner figure of the opposite sex that shapes your desires and projections. You will meet the wise old man, the great mother, the trickster, those ancient patterns of the psyche that direct your life from the depths, and each of them will demand something of you: honesty, courage, the willingness to endure discomfort without fleeing back into distraction. Most will not make this journey. They will return to the familiar warmth of shared life, telling themselves they have chosen love when in truth they have chosen safety. And there is no shame in that, only the understanding that safety and freedom rarely live in the same place. But for the few who remain, who endure the long nights and the absence of applause, there comes a moment when the desert blooms. You begin to feel whole, not because someone has completed you, but because you have called back every part of yourself that you once gave away. You are not half of anything, you are entire, and in that entirety you are finally capable of love that does not betray the self. And yet, as the self takes root in its own soil, a strange phenomenon occurs. You begin to see with unbearable clarity the masks that others wear, the hidden bargains they strike with themselves just to keep from feeling alone. You notice it in the way they speak of love, not as a mystery that deepens freedom, but as a contract that guarantees safety. You watch their bodies lean unconsciously toward one another, not out of delight, but out of a mutual agreement not to wander too far from the familiar. And it becomes clear that much of what passes for love is a quiet conspiracy to keep the unknown at bay. When you have tasted the raw air of solitude, this becomes difficult to unsee. You walk into a room filled with couples, and beneath the laughter, you hear the murmur of unspoken resentments, unfulfilled dreams, the low hum of compromises made so gradually that no one remembers the moment of surrender. It is not that these people are malicious, it is that they have learned to survive by fitting their souls into smaller spaces. And in doing so, they have forgotten the architecture of their original shape. And if you speak of this, if you dare to name what you see, they will call you cynical, damaged, unromantic. But the truth is, you are simply unwilling to drink from the same cup of forgetfulness. There is a kind of spiritual laziness that settles in when another human being is always near. They become your mirror, your sounding board, your alibi for not venturing into the darker corridors of your own mind. Why descend into the depths of your unconscious when you can distract yourself with the drama of another's moods, the comfort of their predictable affections, This is why relationships can so easily become a narcotic, always available to dull the ache of the unanswered questions within. But like any narcotic, the relief is temporary, and the dependency it creates is subtle but total. You begin to need the other, not because of who they are, but because of what they shield you from seeing. And here lies the danger for the creator, the thinker, the seeker. For in this climate of constant emotional negotiation, the inner fire is slowly dampened. The soul, which thrives on the unpredictable and the chaotic, is soothed into compliance. You stop wrestling with your inner demons because you do not wish to bring their noise into the shared space. You stop following the thread of a dangerous idea because it might unsettle the peace you have built together. The very friction that could ignite transformation is avoided, and in its place grows a pleasant, numbing stability. And make no mistake, stability, while comforting, is often the enemy of the profound. The mind that is unbound, that is allowed to roam without interference, begins to form connections that appear irrational at first glance, but reveal themselves as deep truths over time. It begins to speak a language that is not of the collective, but of the inner world, mythic, symbolic, uncompromising. This is the language of dreams, of archetypes, of the unconscious itself. But such a language cannot survive in a space where it must be translated into something palatable for another. In the solitude of your own being, it flows freely, and it begins to reshape you from the inside out. This is why so many of the great works of thought, of art, of spiritual insight were born not in the embrace of companionship, but in the quiet and often the loneliness of separation. It is not that love cannot coexist with creation. It is that creation requires a degree of autonomy that most relationships are unwilling to grant. The demands of intimacy, as it is commonly practiced, are demands for presence, for attention, for emotional availability, but the demands of creation are for absence, for distance, for immersion in a world that is invisible to everyone but yourself. And these two demands, when placed in the same space, will sooner or later begin to compete for your loyalty. You must decide then where your allegiance lies. Will you give your life to the careful tending of a shared garden, beautiful and predictable, or will you allow yourself to be led into the wilderness of your own mind, where nothing is guaranteed but the possibility of finding something entirely new? One path offers the comfort of belonging, the other the terror and exhilaration of becoming, and no one can make that choice for you. When I speak of becoming, I do not mean becoming in the shallow sense of self-improvement. I mean the becoming that is an act of continual death and rebirth, the dismantling of every false identity you have worn, the stripping away of every borrowed belief. This process cannot be done halfway. It cannot be done while also maintaining the performance of being the ideal partner, the reliable companion, the keeper of someone else's peace. It is a solitary labor, often misunderstood, sometimes despised, because it places your relationship with your own soul above every other bond. Do you see now why so few undertake it? The price is too high for most. They would rather keep the stability of their known life than risk the disorientation of meeting themselves without mediation. But for those who do take the path, the reward is unlike anything that can be found in the arms of another. It is the kind of freedom that cannot be given, only claimed. It is the knowing that you can walk into the silence and not be undone. It is a recognition that you are no longer at the mercy of another's approval, that your existence is justified not by what you give to others, but by the truth you embody in yourself. And once you have known this, once you have tasted the unfiltered clarity of living without the need for permission, you will find it almost impossible to return to the old patterns. Even if you enter into love again, you will not enter as the one who needs. You will not bargain away pieces of yourself for the sake of harmony. You will love from the overflow, not from the lack. And such love, rare as it is, can only be recognized by those who have also walked the path of solitude. The irony is that when you no longer need anyone, you are finally capable of loving without condition. You can see the other not as your salvation, but as a fellow traveler. You can allow them their storms, their shadows, their separate journey, without needing to mold them into something that soothes your fears. And you can stand in your own storms without demanding that they be calmed by another's presence. This is love that does not bind, does not bargain, does not decay into the quiet resentment of self-abandonment. But such love is not for the many, it is for the few who have faced the darkness within and emerged with their own light intact. There comes a moment in the solitary journey when the initial ache of absence dissolves and you begin to sense the presence of something greater moving within you. It is not another person, nor is it the ghost of one you once loved. It is the raw pulse of your own being, a current that had always been there, but was buried under layers of noise, distraction, and compromise. In the stillness, this current rises like an underground river, breaking through the surface, carrying with it fragments of forgotten dreams, unexpressed truths, and a fierce longing that is not for another, but for the wholeness that has always been your birthright. Most people never reach this point because they retreat at the first sign of discomfort. They believe that the pain of solitude is proof that something is wrong, that they have failed in the game of human connection. But the truth is, the pain is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of shedding. You are losing the old skin, the false identities that made you acceptable to the herd, but unrecognizable to yourself. This is why the transition feels like death, because in a very real way, it is, and yet, it is the only death worth embracing, for on the other side waits not an afterlife, but your true life, unedited, unapproved, and utterly your own. You may wonder why this work cannot be done within the bounds of a relationship. The answer lies in the nature of transformation itself. Real transformation is not a tidy process. It is not predictable, polite, or convenient. It will disrupt your routines, pull you into moods you cannot explain, and demand decisions that will unsettle the very foundations of the life you have built. And most relationships, as they are commonly constructed, are not designed to withstand such chaos. They are designed to preserve equilibrium, to protect both partners from too much change at once. When you begin to shift in ways that threaten that equilibrium, the relationship will try to pull you back, not always out of malice, but out of its instinct for survival. And so, if you wish to undergo the deep alchemy of the soul, you must step outside the structures that demand your constancy. You must enter a space where there are no witnesses, no negotiations, no one to soothe you back into the old patterns. In this space, you will find yourself confronted not only with your strengths, but with your most persistent self-deceptions. You will meet the parts of you that you have judged unworthy, the impulses you have labeled as dangerous, the desires you have suppressed for fear of what they might destroy. These are not intruders, they are exiled aspects of your own soul. And they will remain in exile until you have the courage to welcome them home. The shadow is not an enemy to be slain, but a truth to be embraced. It carries within it the vitality and authenticity you have traded for social acceptance. Your anger, when integrated, becomes the force that protects your boundaries. Your envy, when understood, becomes a compass pointing to what you have denied yourself. Even your loneliness, when faced without flinching, becomes a portal to self-intimacy. But you cannot make these integrations while you are still bending yourself to fit the contours of another's comfort. The shadow will not speak in a room where you are still performing. There is also another figure that emerges in solitude, the anima or animus, the archetypal counterpart of your own psyche. This figure appears in dreams, in sudden fascinations, in the quiet pull towards certain images or people. It is not a literal lover, but the embodiment of qualities you have yet to claim within yourself. To mistake this figure for an actual person is one of the great tragedies of human life. For it leads you into relationships that are really projections, attempts to claim in the outer world what can only be integrated within. Many marriages are built on this mistake. And they collapse not because love was absent, but because the soul cannot live forever in the shadow of its own unclaimed potential. The work of reclaiming these archetypal energies is intensely personal. It requires that you learn to dialogue with your inner figures, to understand their symbols, to decode the messages hidden in your dreams and intuitions. This is sacred work, and it is easily corrupted by the constant need to explain yourself to another. In solitude, you are free to follow these threads wherever they lead, without fear that they will unsettle the fragile agreements that keep a relationship afloat. You can be as irrational, as intense, as uncontainable as the psyche demands, and in doing so, you create the conditions for real transformation. Of course, this freedom comes with its own dangers. Without the mirrors of relationship, it is easy to become lost in your own labyrinths, to mistake your projections for truths, to spiral into self-absorption. This is why solitude must be held with intention, with the discipline of a seeker rather than the indulgence of an escapee. You are not withdrawing from the world to avoid it. You are withdrawing to re-enter it from a place of sovereignty. This distinction is vital. Escapism will leave you hollow. True solitude will leave you whole. And when you return, and you will not return as you left, you will no longer seek someone to complete you. For you will know yourself as complete. You will not offer love as a bargain for safety, but as a gift freely given. You will not shrink from the truth to preserve harmony, for you will understand that harmony without truth is the most dangerous illusion of all. You will love without binding, without demanding, without the silent ledger of compromises, owed and paid. And if you are not met in this love, you will walk away without bitterness, knowing that your loyalty lies first with the integrity of your own soul. There will come a day when you stand at the threshold of a choice so stark that it will seem almost cruel. On one side will be the life you were told to want, the one that offers you company, recognition, and a certain kind of safety. On the other will be the uncharted expanse of your own becoming, stripped of guarantees, unsoftened by companionship. Most will take the first path, and they will be applauded for it. They will call it maturity, responsibility, realism. But you, if you have heard the call of your own soul even once, will know that these words are often nothing more than ornate wrappings for surrender. This is the tragedy of our time. We mistake adaptation for wisdom, conformity for love, comfort for truth. We cling to the known because we believe the unknown will devour us, and in doing so, we let the most essential parts of us starve quietly in the shadows. You were not born to spend your life smoothing over your edges, so they will not cut others. You were not born to construct a self that is acceptable to the herd at the cost of your own fire. The call that keeps you awake at night, the restlessness that gnaws at you in moments of stillness, these are not signs of a defect. They are the birth cries of the self that will not be domesticated. But hear me clearly. To answer this call is to invite a kind of exile. You will lose certain friendships. You will disturb the fragile comfort of family gatherings. You will no longer be able to participate in the polite fictions that keep most relationships intact. People will accuse you of being cold, arrogant, too independent, too much. They will say you think you are better than others. But this is only because your refusal to bend exposes the places where they have already broken. Do not expect understanding. Do not expect applause. The path of individuation is not a performance for others to approve. It is a covenant you make in the silence between yourself and the depths from which your life arises. And the moment you start to live for that depth, you step out of the invisible contract that governs most of human interaction. The contract that says, I will not disturb your illusions if you do not disturb mine. You will disturb them simply by being. This is why solitude, for the one who truly chooses it, is not an empty room, but a vast interior landscape. Here you will meet the archetypes in their unmasked form. The Great Mother may come to you not as comfort, but as the devouring force that strips you of what no longer serves. The wise old man may arrive not as a gentle guide, but as the stern voice that demands you stop lying to yourself. The shadow will appear in shapes you thought belonged only to your enemies, only to reveal that they were always part of you. And as you engage with them, you begin to see that you were never alone. Your inner world is a council. a constellation, a living myth in which you are both the seeker and the sought. This is the secret most will never tell you. True sovereignty is not gained by conquering the outer world, but by no longer being conquered by your own unconscious. The person who has faced their own darkness without flinching is no longer at the mercy of it. They can enter the world without fear of being possessed by the collective, without being seduced into roles that betray their essence. And because they do not need others to define them, they can meet others without needing to control them. This is freedom, not the shallow freedom of doing what you please, but the profound freedom of no longer being bound by what once ruled you from within. When you reach this place, love itself changes. It ceases to be a search for completion and becomes an overflow of what you have already found. You no longer ask another to carry the weight of your unclaimed self, nor do you volunteer to carry theirs. You stand as two whole beings, meeting in the space between, not to escape solitude, but to honor it in each other. Such love is not dependent on constant presence, nor is it threatened by distance. It breathes in rhythm with the seasons of the soul coming together when the inner tides align, parting without drama, when the individual journey calls. I tell you this not to romanticize the solitary path, but to warn you of its cost. For once you have tasted the raw truth of yourself, you cannot return to the half-light in which most live. You will always feel the pull of the depths, even in the midst of company. And if you ignore it, it will turn to restlessness, then to despair, and finally to quiet death of the spirit. Better to risk the storms of your own becoming than to drown silently in the shallow waters of comfort. So I leave you with this. Do not be afraid to disappoint the world. The world will recover. But if you betray yourself, there may be no recovery. The path is narrow, the nights are long, and the silence will at times feel unbearable. But in that silence, you will hear the voice that has been calling you all your life. Follow it, even if it leads you away from every hand you thought would hold you. Even if it leaves you standing alone at the edge of everything you once knew, for it is there, in that trembling and terrible freedom, that you will finally remember why you came into this life at all. And when you know that, you will have found something far greater than love. You will have found yourself